Welcome to Fiery Nights, where the darkest stories unfold in the stillness of the night. Where are you listening from tonight? Are you safely curled up in your room or perhaps surrounded by the noise of others? Or maybe you find yourself in a quiet, haunting place alone with your thoughts and the whispers of something far more sinister. Wherever you are, I invite you to settle in. Tonight's tale will take you into the heart of darkness, a place where the line between the living and the dead is thin, and the silence is deafening. Story 1. The clock struck midnight. Its chimes echoed through the empty house, filling the air with a hollow, resonant sound. Sarah sat alone in her living room, the only light in the room coming from the faint glow of her phone. It was late, later than she usually stayed up, but she couldn't bring herself to go to bed. Her thoughts were too restless, her mind caught in a web of worry that she couldn't untangle. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that was oppressive, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. She glanced at the clock again. Midnight. Another long minute passed in the stillness. Then, the phone rang. Sarah's heart skipped a beat, her breath catching in her throat. It wasn't an unusual time for a phone call, but there was something about the ring, sharp, sudden, unexpected, that made her hesitate before reaching for it. She quickly glanced at the caller ID, unknown. A chill ran down her spine. She should have let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of her. She picked up the phone, her hand trembling slightly as she pressed it to her ear. "Hello?" she said, her voice unsure, strained by the silence of the house. At first there was nothing but static, a low hum like a bad connection. She waited, but still nothing. Then, just as she was about to hang up, a voice came through the phone. It was soft at first, barely a whisper. "Sarah." She froze. Her pulse quickened and her mind raced. How did they know her name? The voice was deep, distorted, as though coming from far away or from somewhere beneath the earth. "Who is this?" she asked, her voice trembling now. She regretted picking up the phone, regretted not just ignoring it like she normally did. But the voice didn't answer her question. Instead, it continued, the words slow and deliberate, like it was savoring each one. "Don't hang up, Sarah. You'll regret it." A cold wave of dread washed over her. She pulled the phone away from her ear for a brief second, her finger hovering over the red button to end the call. But something stopped her. The warning, the way the voice had spoken her name, as though it had all the time in the world. She shook her head, trying to shake the unease building in her chest. Her finger trembled on the screen, but she didn't hang up. "I don't know who you are, but I'm hanging up now," she said, her voice a little stronger now, more assertive. But the voice only chuckled, a low, eerie sound that sent a shiver down her spine. "You think it's that easy?" the voice asked. "You think you can just end this with a button press?" "I'll be back, Sarah. You'll never be alone again." The line went dead. The sudden silence that followed was so loud, it was almost deafening. Sarah stared at the phone in disbelief, the faint buzz of static still lingering in her ears. Her heartbeat drummed in her chest, a steady rhythm that seemed to echo in the quiet of the room. Who was that? What did they want? The unsettling feeling of being watched crept over her again, growing stronger. She looked around the room, as if expecting to see someone standing just behind her. But the room was empty, bathed in the pale glow of moonlight streaming through the windows. The air in the room had changed, heavy, thick with something she couldn't name. Then, it happened again. The phone rang. This time, Sarah didn't wait for the caller ID to show up. She let it ring, hoping it would stop, wishing it would stop. But it didn't. The ringing seemed to drag on forever, echoing through the empty space, getting louder with each passing second. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed the phone, her hands shaking as she pressed it to her ear. "Hello? Sarah." The voice was the same. It was him, or it was. Whatever it was, who are you? What do you want from me? Sarah's voice cracked, the words almost lost in the frantic beat of her heart. "You've heard me before, Sarah. Don't you recognize me?" Her blood ran cold. She could feel it, a weight in the air, a sensation like something was in the room with her, invisible yet undeniable. Something was drawing closer. "I'm not playing your games," Sarah snapped. "I'm hanging up now." She went to press the button again, but just before she did, the voice whispered something, just loud enough for her to hear. "I'll be there soon." The line clicked dead. Her breath caught in her throat. A long, heavy silence filled the room, but it wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. The air was thick with it. Every shadow seemed to stretch unnaturally long. Every creak of the house seemed louder, more deliberate. She stood up slowly, her knees weak. She had to check. She had to make sure everything was locked. The windows, the doors, the house. She turned toward the hallway, but then froze. There, standing in the doorway, was a figure, a shadow, tall and slender, its edges blurred by the dim light. It was barely visible, almost like a trick of the light, but it was there. Her heart skipped a beat, the blood draining from her face. The figure was just standing there, unmoving, as if it had been waiting for her. The phone in her hand buzzed again, snapping her attention back. Her finger hovered over the screen, but something inside told her not to pick it up. Then, the shadow in the doorway shifted, moving slightly. It was closer now. "Sarah." The voice came from the shadow, the very air around it vibrating with the same chilling tone from the phone call. Her breath caught in her throat. There was no escape. Before she could react, the lights flickered. The phone buzzed again. The voice continued, closer now. "I told you I would be back." And that was when she realized she had never been alone. The caller had never left. Extension. Sarah's fingers trembled as she reached for the phone again, the unsettling weight of the shadow in the doorway pressing down on her. She had to act quickly, but her mind was clouded with confusion. The same voice that had spoken to her on the phone now stood in the doorway, its words reverberating through her body. "I told you I would be back." The voice sent a chill down her spine, every word a reminder that this was no ordinary prank call. This wasn't just someone trying to scare her. This was real. Something was in the house with her. Her heart pounded and her pulse thundered in her ears. Her eyes darted toward the kitchen, where the phone's light blinked from the counter. The shadow in the doorway loomed larger, its form shifting slightly as if it was taking a step toward her. She knew she had to make a choice. She glanced back at the phone, still vibrating in her hand. A cold sweat broke out on her skin, and her body trembled with fear. She had to pick up the phone again. She had to. "Hello," she whispered, barely audible, hoping her voice would hold steady. There was a long pause, long enough to send dread crawling up her spine. Then the voice returned, distorted and warped, as if it had somehow crossed into her very home through the phone's line. "You didn't listen, Sarah. You should have stayed silent." The words sunk into her chest like a heavy stone, but before she could reply, the figure in the doorway shifted forward, its face still hidden. The whispering voice came again, but this time, louder, clearer. "You'll never leave." She couldn't move, her legs frozen in place as the darkness in the room seemed to close in. The shadow stretched, impossibly tall, until it filled the entire doorway. The air became thick with the presence of something otherworldly, something that had no intention of letting her go. The phone slipped from her fingers, and it landed with a muffled thud on the floor. And then, without warning, the lights went out. The room plunged into darkness, but Sarah didn't need the light to know the shadow was closer now. She could feel its presence, like the cold breath of something ancient that had waited for far too long. Her heart raced as she turned around to run, but the sound of footsteps, soft, deliberate, echoed behind her. Each step, closer, Every step felt like a countdown, and the feeling of something pulling her into the unknown deepened. She ran. But no matter how fast she moved, the footsteps behind her never slowed. Story. The clock struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the silent house. The sound seemed to reverberate in the thick, heavy air, the only noise breaking the stillness that had consumed Emily's home. She sat alone in her dimly lit living room, the faint glow of her phone illuminating her face as she scrolled through old messages, trying to distract herself from the silence. It had been a long, exhausting day, nothing particularly eventful, just the typical grind. She had been home for hours now, hoping for some peace and quiet. The day had stretched on endlessly, and the night seemed to stretch with it. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the trees against her window. The house creaked with the weight of the wind and the age of the structure. The temperature inside had dropped considerably since she'd arrived home, and a chill had settled in the corners of her rooms. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and tried to ignore the feeling of unease that had been creeping over her ever since she stepped inside. The phone buzzed again, interrupting the stillness. Emily glanced at it, expecting a message from her friend, or perhaps another work-related notification. But no, it was an unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat. Normally, she'd let unknown numbers go to voicemail, but for some reason, she felt compelled to answer. Without thinking, she pressed the green button. "Hello?" she said, her voice breaking the silence. At first, there was nothing, just static, a low hum filling the dead air. Then, as if the person on the other end had been waiting for the right moment, a voice came through, soft and distorted. "Emily." Her breath caught in her throat. The voice was familiar, yet distant, as if she'd heard it before but couldn't quite place it. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of it. The voice spoke again, this time clearer but still distorted. "Emily, it's been so long." She felt a chill crawl down her spine. This wasn't just a wrong number or a prank call. It was too personal, too familiar, like someone was deliberately trying to reach her, someone who knew her far too well. She glanced at the caller ID again, but the number was unrecognized. She was alone. There was no one nearby. "Who is this?" she asked, her voice trembling now. She stood up and paced around the room, trying to shake off the unease growing in the pit of her stomach. There was no response at first, just silence. Then, the voice came again, this time sharper, more distinct, as if it was coming from directly inside her head. "Don't you remember me, Emily?" Her heart stopped. A name flashed in her mind, distant and blurry, a long-forgotten memory. Her aunt, no, not her aunt, someone from her past. Someone who had been there, who had disappeared, but whose presence still lingered like a shadow at the edges of her consciousness. "Who are you?" she demanded, the words slipping out like a breath she didn't want to take. The voice lingered, slow and deliberate. It seemed to savor her fear. "I've always been with you." Emily's hand tightened on the phone. The walls of the house seemed to close in, the shadows growing deeper. She looked around, her eyes darting from corner to corner, but there was no one in the room with her. The house, once her safe haven, now felt suffocating, the silence too thick, the air too cold. "Stop it," she whispered, more to herself than to the voice. "Stop playing games with me." The line went dead. Silence. Complete, unnerving silence. The static that had filled the background was gone, leaving her alone with the pounding of her heart. She looked at the phone again, her hands shaking slightly. The screen was black, and for a brief moment she wondered if it had all been a figment of her imagination. But then, the phone rang again. She froze. The ringing seemed louder this time, more insistent. Slowly she picked it up, her finger hovering over the answer button for a moment. Her instinct screamed at her to hang up, but something she couldn't name urged her to listen. She answered. "Hello?" The voice was back, but this time it wasn't soft or distorted. It was clear, chilling in its simplicity. Don't you remember me, Emily? Her hands went cold. Her legs turned to jelly, and she sank back onto the couch. The phone still pressed to her ear. The voice continued, growing clearer with every word, louder as if it was drawing nearer to her. I've been watching you. A chill swept through her body. This wasn't just a strange call. It was something more, something far more sinister. Who are you? What do you want? She demanded, her voice shaky but laced with fear. I want you to remember, the voice said, soft now, but its words filled with malice. I want you to remember what you've forgotten. Emily's mind raced. What was this? A threat? A warning? A game? But the more she thought about it, the more she realized she couldn't remember. She couldn't place the voice, but something was pulling at the edges of her memory. Something long buried. Something she didn't want to remember. The line went silent again, leaving her breathless. She looked at the phone in her hand, her mind racing, her thoughts clouded with confusion. The stillness in the house was deafening, and then the doorbell rang. Her blood ran cold. The doorbell never rang at this hour. It was past midnight. Her friends weren't coming over. The neighbors wouldn't visit this late. She slowly stood up, her feet unsteady beneath her, her mind racing with 1,000 possibilities. She checked the peephole. Nothing. Her heart thudded louder in her chest, and a strange sense of déjà vu washed over her. Something about the doorbell, the timing, the ringing reminded her of something that had happened long ago. Something she couldn't quite remember. A chill crept up her spine. She didn't open the door, but the ringing didn't stop. It kept going, relentless. The phone buzzed again. Her hand trembled as she reached for it, eyes still fixed on the door. The phone rang with a new message, and she opened it without thinking. The message was simple. I'm outside. She didn't need to think about it. The voice on the phone was still in her head, its words etched into her mind. I'm outside. Without another thought, she rushed to the door. Her heart pounded in her chest as she pressed her hand against the doorknob. The doorbell rang again, a chilling repetition. She flung the door open. Nothing. No one. The empty street stretched out in front of her, the streetlights casting long shadows on the sidewalk. Her breath misted in the cold night air, and the wind picked up, sending a shiver down her spine. She stepped outside, looking around, her breath coming in ragged gasps. There was no one. Nothing. She slowly turned to go back inside when something caught her eye. On the doormat, just barely visible in the dim light, was something strange. A single black feather. She reached down and picked it up, her fingers trembling. Suddenly the phone buzzed again. A message. She opened it. I'm inside. Her blood turned to ice. The door slammed shut behind her, and in the reflection of the glass she saw something that made her heart stop. A figure, standing behind her. She didn't turn, because she already knew who it was. Story 3. The clock on the wall clicked over to 12 a.m. with a soft final chime. The house fell into an eerie silence that seemed to stretch endlessly. Sarah sat alone in her kitchen, nursing a warm cup of tea, her thoughts drifting as she stared at the steam rising lazily from the cup. The house was small, cozy, everything in its place. It had been a long week, and the quiet of the house was a welcome respite. The glow from the overhead light was the only thing keeping the darkness at bay. Outside, the wind picked up, howling softly as the branches of the trees tapped gently against the windows. Her phone buzzed across the table, the notification light blinking in the dark, snapping Sarah from her thoughts. Just the usual spam, she muttered to herself. But something about the phone's sudden buzz unsettled her. A nagging feeling tugged at the back of her mind, an odd, irrational sense of unease that she couldn't quite shake. She glanced at the phone. Unknown number. She hesitated. She always ignored unknown callers. But tonight she couldn't bring herself to do it. Something about the late hour, the stillness of the house, it all felt too complete. She swiped the screen and pressed the phone to her ear. "Hello?" she said, her voice small, not quite sure what to expect. For a moment, there was nothing but a long, drawn-out silence on the other end of the line. The sound of static crackled through the receiver before a voice finally came through, soft and distant, like a whisper from across the room. "Sarah." The voice was low, barely audible, but unmistakable. She froze, her stomach flipping. It wasn't a voice she recognized, but there was something oddly familiar about it. Something about the tone, the way it echoed in her chest, felt unnervingly close. She swallowed hard. "Who is this?" she asked, trying to steady her voice. The line went dead. A long pause and then... nothing. Her heartbeat quickened, and the silence that filled the room felt even heavier now. She glanced at the screen. No number, just a blank void where the caller's information should have been. She looked at the clock. 12:03 a.m. Shaking her head, she let out a soft sigh. It was probably just a wrong number. Maybe someone trying to prank her. She set the phone down, but just as her fingers brushed the table, it buzzed again. Same unknown number. This time, her heart skipped. She stared at the screen, the silence of the room stretching painfully around her. She reached for the phone again, her fingers trembling as she answered. "Hello?" The same voice, now clearer, though it still had that strange, distant quality to it. "Sarah, you're not alone." Her breath caught in her throat. Her mind raced, thoughts jumbled and incoherent. The voice was coming from inside her own home. She was sure of it. The air around her seemed to shift, and her skin tingled with an unseen presence. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice strained. The response came slowly, deliberately. "You've forgotten." The line cut again. This time it didn't return to silence. A new sound emerged, a faint rhythmic tapping, light at first, like the sound of footsteps on a hardwood floor echoing through the phone. Tap, tap, tap. Her pulse pounded in her ears as the sound grew louder, closer, more distinct. "Who is this?" she repeated, but the line remained dead. She snapped the phone closed and set it down, her mind racing, her chest tight. The tapping continued, faint but steady, tapping against the wooden floor. It sounded real, like something was in her house. Her gaze flicked to the hallway outside the kitchen, but the darkened space remained still. The silence unbroken except for the distant hum of the refrigerator. The tapping grew louder. Tap, tap, tap. Closer now. It was coming from upstairs. Her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't heard anything before, no creaks, no movement. How could the footsteps have been so distinct, so clear, and yet there was no one in the house? She stood up, her legs weak beneath her, and moved cautiously toward the hallway. Every instinct screamed at her to stay where she was, but something she couldn't explain, compelled her to investigate. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as the tapping grew louder. Each step felt like a drumbeat, the rhythm of her growing dread. She climbed the stairs, each step creaking under her weight. The hallway at the top was dim, illuminated only by the light from downstairs. She turned slowly, looking down the dark corridor. The tapping had stopped. The silence was deafening now, pressing in from all sides. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. No response. The silence stretched on, longer than it should have been. The walls felt as though they were closing in on her, and her heartbeat thudded in her ears. Then she heard it again, faint at first, but growing louder. The unmistakable sound of footsteps dragging across the floor, moving toward her. Her body went cold. "Sarah." The whispering voice came again, closer this time, louder, and now unmistakably real. She turned quickly, the air thick with a creeping fear that seemed to seep into her bones. Her eyes darted down the hallway. Nothing, no one. But the sound of footsteps was unmistakable, right behind her now. She couldn't breathe. Her chest tightened, panic rising like bile in her throat. She spun around, looking for any escape, but the hallway was a dead end. There was no way out. She was trapped. The voice came again, clearer now, as if it was right beside her, whispering in her ear. "You remember me now, don't you?" In an instant, her mind flashed to memories she'd long buried. The image of a figure standing in her childhood home. A tall shadow that had always watched her from the corner of her eye. She tried to push the memory away, but it wouldn't leave. The tapping was back again, faster now, more frantic, as if something or someone was closing in. She couldn't fight it. Her legs moved before her mind could catch up, rushing toward the stairs. She ran, her heart pounding in her chest as she heard the steps following behind her, echoing louder with each passing second. Tap, 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 faster now. She stumbled down the stairs, but when she reached the bottom, the lights flickered and went out, plunging her into darkness. Her hand fumbled for the wall switch, but it was useless. She couldn't see. The air felt thick with a presence that pressed in on her from all sides. And then, footsteps, right behind her. Her breath hitched. The coldness gripped her body as she spun around, but no one was there. Nothing but the void of the dark house. The phone rang again. It had to be the same number. There was no mistaking it. Her fingers shook as she answered it, too terrified to ignore it this time. "Hello?" The voice, now unmistakably clear, came through with a chilling finality. "I'm inside." The line clicked dead. The clock struck midnight, its chimes reverberating through the empty house, filling the air with a hollow, resonant sound. The room was draped in darkness, save for the faint glow of a phone resting on the table. The stillness in the house was palpable, so thick it seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the wind howled, sending the shadows of trees swaying against the windows like dark, bony fingers tapping against the glass. Inside, the silence felt like something waiting to happen, something inevitable. The house, once vibrant with the sounds of daily life, now stood quiet, abandoned in the stillness of the night. Every inch of the room seemed to echo with the weight of time, each second dragging slower than the last. The air was thick, almost oppressive, pressing in on the stillness that had taken over. In the dark corners of the room, the shadows seemed to move, shifting ever so slightly, as if they were alive, as if they knew something was coming. The phone rang. The sudden sound cut through the thick silence like a knife, jarring and unexpected. It was loud in the quiet room, startling and sharp. There was something unnerving about the ring, its urgency, its insistence. The familiar sound now felt out of place, like an intrusion into the stillness of the house. The phone buzzed again. Then again, finally, it stopped. The silence returned, this time heavier, more suffocating than before. The phone rang once more. It was an unknown number. No name, no identity, just a faceless call. The ringing reverberated through the house, louder this time, insistent. It was as though the phone was calling, begging to be answered. The phone's owner stood motionless, staring at it. A hesitation hung in the air, but curiosity tugged at the edges of the mind. Slowly, cautiously, they reached for the phone, the fingers trembling slightly as they brought it to their ear. "Hello?" The voice that came through the phone was soft at first, almost too faint to hear. A low hum buzzed through the receiver, the static crackling like distant thunder slowly building. "Hello?" The voice repeated, louder this time. The words were unfamiliar, but there was something about the tone, something hauntingly familiar. It sounded as if it were coming from far away, from some other place, and yet close, like the voice was in the room with them, breathing the same air. "Who is this?" The words came out more from instinct than reason, but the reply was slow, deliberate, almost as though it were savoring the moment. "You know who I am." The response sent a cold shiver through the bones. The voice didn't sound like it belonged to anyone real. It wasn't human, not in the way that made sense. The tone was distant, distorted, like it had crossed over from another world. "I don't know who you are," the listener said, their own voice trembling. barely above a whisper. The voice on the other end laughed softly, a low, eerie sound that sent an uncomfortable chill down their spine. "You do know me," it said, its words drawn out, like it was weaving a story from the air around them. "I've been waiting for you." The phone trembled in their hand. Every muscle in their body screamed to hang up to end the call, but they couldn't move. The weight of the words hung in the air like an invisible force. How could this stranger know them? How could they know anything about them? "I don't know what you want, but I'm hanging up now," they said, their voice shaking as they tried to force themselves to act. The voice on the other end chuckled again, but this time there was something deeper, something unsettling about it. "You think you can end this with the press of a button?" The voice spoke, its words trailing off into a sinister whisper. "I'll be back, and when I do, you'll remember." Before the listener could react, the line went dead. The sudden silence that followed was deafening. The weight of the words seemed to hang in the air, thick and suffocating. The phone felt too heavy in their hand, as if the call had left something behind, something invisible but real, something watching, waiting. The house was silent once more, but it was not the peaceful kind of silence that had existed earlier. It felt wrong, oppressive. The very air seemed to shift, like something had changed. Something had entered the room with them. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. The tension in the room was thick, tangible. The mind raced, replaying the voice's words over and over, trying to make sense of it. But nothing made sense. How could anyone know something so personal? The voice. There was something ancient about it, something that made the heart race with an unexplainable dread. The phone rang again. This time it wasn't a hesitation. There was no thinking, no rationalizing. The phone rang again, sharp, insistent. But the mind had already gone cold. This time the ringing didn't stop. The listener hesitated for a moment, their fingers hovering above the phone, unsure of what to do. The room felt colder now. The shadows in the corners had grown darker, deeper, as if something was watching, as if something was waiting. Finally, they picked up the phone. "Hello?" Their voice was barely a whisper, barely audible. The voice came through immediately, its tone unchanged. "I told you I'd be back." The words cut through the air like ice. The listener's breath hitched. This time there was no static, no distortion. The voice was clearer but just as chilling. "You thought you could escape, didn't you?" "No." The listener's voice faltered. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" "I want you to remember." The words hit like a blow to the chest, knocking the breath out of them. "Remember? What was there to remember? What was it talking about?" Suddenly there was a sound from behind, a slow creak as if someone had just stepped into the room. The listener's pulse quickened. They turned, heart racing, but there was no one there. The air seemed to thicken, the shadows in the room now reaching out toward them, pulling closer. The temperature dropped and the room seemed to grow darker, more oppressive. The lights flickered once, twice before going out completely. The phone remained pressed against their ear, the voice now more insistent, more urgent. "You're not alone," it said, its voice almost a hiss now, sharp and piercing. "I'll always be with you." A cold breeze washed over them, and they could feel the temperature around them plummet. The room felt smaller, as if the walls were closing in. The shadows had grown longer, filling the space, swallowing the light. The voice on the phone seemed to grow louder, more real. It filled the room, pressing against them, suffocating them. "You'll remember soon," it whispered. "I'll help you remember." The phone crackled and went dead. The room was silent again, except now. It wasn't just silence, it was an oppressive stillness, the kind that made every breath feel too loud, every movement feel too sudden. The air in the room was thick, heavy with something unseen. The listener stood frozen, rooted to the spot, their pulse racing in their ears. A sound, so faint at first, it could have been mistaken for a trick of the wind, began to echo in the distance. The sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming closer. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they filled the room. Each step echoed in the empty house, bouncing off the walls, growing louder with every passing moment. But when the listener turned, there was no one there. The footsteps stopped, and then the voice spoke again, but this time, it was behind them. Soft, almost tender. "I'm right behind you." The listener whipped around, heart hammering in their chest. But there was nothing there. The room was empty. The footsteps began again. The phone rang one final time. The voice, now sharp and unyielding, echoed through the receiver. "You'll never be alone again."